The government's very powerful. And if you oppose the government in your writing, get ready for trouble. Seeing somebody destroy my legacy, that's very motivating. You know, you buy a new iPhone, you're not getting wealthier. You buy my newsletter, I promise you, I'm gonna do everything I can to make sure you get wealthier. And my track record proves that I can do it.
My name is Tommy Humphreys. I am a publisher from Vancouver, Canada, with a website called thebigscore.com. I'm incredibly excited to be in Baltimore at the Meadowdale Farm with legendary newsletter publisher and investment analyst Porter Stansberry. Porter, thank you for having me here.
Tommy, welcome to Meadowdale.
Really good to meet you. We just got to have some eggs on toast in your kitchen, and I feel right at home here, so thank you.
Thanks for coming all this way. I wouldn't have wanted to get on a plane from Vancouver to Baltimore, Maryland in the middle of winter.
I was even worse. I was coming from Palm Springs with my family. We were having a vacation.
I definitely would not have left.
But this opportunity is something I've wanted to meet you for many years, and you might hear some of why in this conversation.
Well, before we get started, can I just say one thing about Palm Springs or Palm Desert, wherever exactly you were?
I'm a Rancho Mirage right in between.
Is that not just an incredible place on earth?
Yeah.
It is extraordinary. If you have never been there before, it's certainly a place to go see. I've never seen anything like it. Just all the manicured houses and lawns, and the absolutely perfect weather. It's
the roads named after celebrities. There's no traffic. Food's great. Sunny every day, and there's 100 golf courses. So
yeah, it's paradise.
I'm looking forward to get back on Friday. But first, I want to talk to you. I thought I should start with something crazy that happened to me in Zimbabwe.
Okay.
You might have heard this story before, but just to set the stage, I met Doug Casey 10 or 12 years ago, and he told me, he's like, you know, when you're a young guy, it's really good to go to Africa.
My Doug Casey's better than yours.
Okay.
Oh, you know, Tommy, you know what you should do, okay? I'll tell you. You should go to Africa, all right? A guy like you could really make something of yourself in Africa. No, you could, okay? Look, you go there, you call a couple of the lawyers, you get a couple of the real estate guys on your side. Next thing you know, you're having tea with the premier or the general or the whatnot, and, you know, they've always got money and they got to find something to do with it, okay? Guy like yourself, you could get connected.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. So
how's that? Not too bad.
This is perfect. This is exactly what happened.
Yeah.
So the opportunity comes up to go with Doug to Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
And I'm like all over it, right? And it's a long way to go, but Doug is just persistent. He's like, we can get to anybody, and he really wanted to meet Gideon Gono, who is the governor of the Central Bank of Zimbabwe from the 2000s, and he presided over hyperinflation. So it was his signature on the $100 trillion bill. And as we're getting a tour of Mugabe's office, this was in the Mugabe's era, he asked, well, we'd really like to meet Gideon Gono. And he keeps pushing this. And so it's arranged, because Gono has left public circle, it's arranged that we are chauffeured to Gono's house for dinner. And we're in these blacked out S600 Mercedes, which is quite an eyesore in Zimbabwe, a very poor place. But in Harare, the capital city there, Borrowdale is sort of the rich neighborhood. And it's from its British history. It's still beautiful. The houses are mansions, lush gardens everywhere. Of course, everything hasn't been touched or invested in since all the Europeans left, unfortunately.
Faded glory.
Yeah.
A lot of that in Buenos Aires as well.
Buenos Aires is spectacular. So we enter the gates of this home, and it's beautiful. It's gated. There's lush greens. It reminded me of Palm Springs. You could have had a couple-hole golf course on it. There's palm trees. And we meet Mr. Gono. He's so incredibly friendly. We meet his daughters, Passion and Purpose. They're both beautiful. I never forgot the names. I thought their names were amazing. And, you know, we were served Johnny Walker Blue Label and chicken wings. And Doug and Gono are talking, and we're right at home. And somehow you come up. And Gono recognized your name, and he said, aha. And he said that End of America, the documentary, was viral in the Zimbabwean government. So as we sit there and we had our dinner, and it was a fantastic dinner, but there's no cutlery in traditional Zimbabwe dinner. So we're eating with our hands, and he insisted that we watch End of America on television while we had dinner in this house. And
all 77 minutes of it.
Exactly 77 minutes.
And of course, I wasn't that surprised, because just because you're presiding over a hyperinflation doesn't mean you don't know what you're doing. And I think that Gideon Gono was very well aware of the problems that inflation was causing in his society. And he was, according to Doug, he was dumbfounded that America would run their economy in essentially the same fashion. And what my documentary is about was that there are these very large social costs. The sociologists call this anomie. There are these very negative externalities to the destruction of the monetary system. And the most basic reason is because in a free market economy with sound money, wages naturally keep pace with productivity. And that never has occurred to a socialist or to a union guy. But if you study economics, that link between productivity and wages is probably, the first law of economics, that and comparative advantage, where you see these things happen in every society, in every age, in every country, and every culture. Why is that? Why would entrepreneurs pay more in wages because productivity is increasing? And the answer, of course, is because the employees are worth more. As productivity increases, as an entrepreneur, you're making more money per employee. And so you're willing to spend more to get more people. And you think about the most famous example of this in the real world was Henry Ford's decision to triple the salary of the Ford auto line workers. And so he took wages from 5 cents to 15 cents an hour and transformed the economy of the United States because there was so much more productivity in his manufacturing line and in the cars he was producing. And so the big problem with inflation is that it severs that peg, so that as productivity continues to rise, more and more money is printed, which lowers the value of the wages so that it doesn't keep pace with productivity. And what inevitably happens is a growing wealth gap. And if you study American economics, you already know this, but productivity delinked from wages in approximately 1974. And that was because we left gold and we began to rapidly increase credit and money in our economy. And the first things that you notice is that people who own assets and have access to credit suddenly are making far more money in relation to other people. And so you think about people who were in real estate in the United States. You think about people who've been in investment banking or private equity. The areas of the market that are able to really use the growth in credit are going to become much wealthier relative to everybody else. What happened to manufacturing? Just left the country, got destroyed. What happened to the average wage of an American? An average after-tax wage in America has not changed in more than 40 years. That's incredibly disruptive to people's lives and happiness and well-being and sense of community and belonging. And as those things erode, this other force emerges, this anomie, and that will lead people to desperation. So you see a huge increase in drug use and alcoholism and petty crime. And it'll also lead people, because they can't increase their wealth or their wages through honest means, they begin to grow more and more desperate and more risky. So you see things like prostitution and pornography explode. You see things like gambling explode. And man, the combination of printing a whole bunch of money and having online gambling on people's phones, there is going to be an entire generation of young men who get wiped out financially. And all of those problems and predictions about what this would inevitably happen to America were in that promotion. And I think it went viral because everybody knew, following the 08 and 09 debacle, that printing all of that money and giving it to the banks and giving it to the mortgage bond investors and bailing out, General Electric, and not bailing out Lehman Brothers, but bailing out, Bank of America and Morgan Stanley and everybody else. Everybody had a very good intuition that that wasn't normal economics and that it would cause a lot of trouble. But they didn't know enough about economics to know what it meant. And so I think that documentary really showed people the consequences of what those actions were going to be. And it's amazing if you go back and look at it today, how many of those things occurred. Because I wrote that before America lost its AAA rating. I wrote that before End of Wall Street, the End of Wall Street movement, before the BLM movement, before there was anything like January 6th or the crazy death zone in the downtown Seattle, or the riots in Portland, and I could go on. But certainly the decision to begin to use the printing press to finance our government's deficits and bailout after bailout after bailout is having very serious negative social consequences. And I'm hopeful, but not optimistic. I'm hopeful that Americans will eventually reject that form of financing and return to a sound money system. But it's awfully hard to get people off of the free money teat once they've started sucking on it.
I was listening to it this morning, and it's been a while since probably at Gono's house. It was amazing how timeless it's been. When you were writing it, did you have any idea how popular it could be?
No. Interestingly, I had been wanting to write that since about 2005, and I'd worked with a series of copywriters to help me try to tell the story. And they had all sort of given up on the project because they just couldn't make it work. So my friend Ray Rivera wrote the first version of it with me, and it never was finished. And then a very successful professional copywriter, Ryan Markish, took it on. He couldn't get his head around it either. And then finally, Mike Palmer, who, as you know, is the chief copywriter at Stansberry Research, he actually hired an outsider to come in and help me. And that version never made a splash. But Mike didn't think it would work at all. And this was by this time it was probably 2009. And it worked well enough to break even, and we mailed it for a little bit, but no one ever saw it or read it. And then Mike and I sat down and wrote the version that is famous. And I guess Mike's thinking was, if a B-level outside copywriter can get it to work, there's more to the idea there than I understand. And so I'll actually focus on it and work on it. But the package that the public saw was probably in its 12th or 15th complete rewrite iteration. And in my experience as a copywriter, I'm not very good. It takes me a lot of tries. So my first big package was The Railroad Across America. I wrote that package from start to finish 18 times, working with my mentor, Mark Ford, before we mailed it. And with Ed of America, it was a similar story where we had to have version after version after version to finally get it right.
Oh, it must have been immensely satisfying to see what it did for the public and for the business.
Yeah, I'm very proud that it stood the test of time.
Yeah.
Because of course, when it came out, there were all kinds of people who, the boo birds and the naysayers. And I remember there was a lot of people who were just really mocking the idea that you should buy gold, and gold's doubled since then. That's not a bad return.
So I want to go back to the beginning of your story and then talk a bit about MarketWise and also markets today. Could you tell me just the genesis of Porter Stansberry? Like I've heard that you were sort of a surf kid. How did you get into the finance world?
I got into the finance world because growing up in Central Florida, surfing was a big deal. And I was a swimmer and a water polo player and a surfer. And the only other guy I knew and my surfing buddies that didn't do drugs and, read books was this guy, Steve Sugarud. And he was our little town's version of Doogie Howser. You might not know what that is.
I do, yeah. Dr. Hauser.
Yeah, the brainchild who goes to college at 12 and, is a doctor by the time he's 19. That was Steve. I can't remember exactly all the details of Steve's academic achievements, but they were immense. And by the time I was graduating from college, he was already managing a multi-$100 million global mutual fund.
Doesn't that sound insane to have somebody so young managing money like that?
Well, Steve is an actual genius, so it wasn't strange, and he did very well at that. But Steve figured out real quickly that the fun thing for him was doing the research, not managing the portfolio and dealing with the clients and the SEC and all that. So he actually walked away from a great job to go write newsletters for Bill Bonner at Agora Inc. And when he did, he needed somebody to help him, and so he called me. And I was just finishing college at the time. And my plan B was to drive my pickup truck to Costa Rica, get a job tending bar, and surf for a couple of years, and have some fun. But instead, I drove down to Delray Beach, Florida, where Steve's office was, and I started working truly 7 days a week from 7 in the morning to 7 at night. And Steve spent about a year teaching me finance, and then I started working with him, writing these financial and economic newsletters about Latin America and Asia. And at the time, in the mid-'90s, emerging markets were booming and investors were very interested in that content. and we had all kinds of fun with it. We got ahead of the big collapse that happened in Latin America in '98 because we had been following. People forget all this now; it's so long ago. But the Thai baht collapsed in, I want to say, early '97 or late '96. And once after another, all of the emerging market currencies in Asia collapsed. And that Thai baht flu eventually spread to Brazil. And the interesting thing about that was Petrobras was one of the largest stocks in all of emerging markets. And I figured out that when people wanted to start selling Latin America, all they're going to sell is Petrobras because that's the only thing that was liquid. And so we bought puts on Petrobras in September of '98, and we made an absolute fortune. And so that kind of stuff got the attention of a lot of investors, and my career started growing.
Just backing up a bit, Mr. Stansberry, your dad, was a Business Week writer.
Mm-hmm.
And Business Week, from my understanding, does more magazine-style storytelling than traditional finance rags. Did you learn a bit about business storytelling from him?
No, I didn't actually. By the time I was out of high school, my dad had been working for the Coca-Cola company for 20 years. I never knew him as a business journalist, but that was his entree into working for Coke. So no, I never actually read any of my dad's business stories. No, that's not how it happened.
Were you considered, were you fascinated with storytelling when you were a kid?
Absolutely. I've always been a bookworm, yeah. When I graduated from high school, I want to say I had at least 500 books in my in my bedroom. Yeah, I've always been a bookworm. Always have read. My whole life, I've read at least a book a week.
Wow.
And I did a lot of writing in college like everybody else did. It's a good thing I was a reader because I would have never gotten anywhere in my life if I hadn't. I was terrible at school. I didn't have much respect for authority or for the teachers, and I wouldn't do homework. And
where do you think you got the lack of respect for authority from?
I don't know, just innate.
Sensitive subject a bit, but I wanted to ask you about your adoption story. Are you comfortable talking about it?
Sure, of course. Yeah, I'm proud of it.
Well, what could you tell us about it?
Well, my biological parents met in Southern California. My mom was a cheerleader. My dad was a star of the baseball team. Popular, good-looking couple, and they set off on the road together as husband and wife after they finished college, and all that got disrupted by Vietnam. My dad got drafted and ended up being a second lieutenant in the Army, and terrible things ensued. My understanding is that he lost all of his platoon in a firefight, and he never recovered. I guess you would call that PTSD today, or shell shock, or whatever that is. But he was never the same human being. And so a year after he got back from Vietnam, he left mom, and he lived the rest of his life as a homeless person.
Wow.
And so my mom got left with 2 little babies and trying to make ends meet. She was a teller for Sunbank, and it was a hard time. And about 2 years later, she met Frank Stansberry, who adopted my brother and I. And, this is all before I was 4 years old. So I don't have any memory of any of that. But my dad that I have today is the only dad I've ever known. And it's ironic because my legal first name is Frank, but I'm not named after my adopted father. I'm named after my mom's dad, my grandfather. So it was just a happy story. My dad was my mom and my brother and I's savior. And he's in his 80s today, and we still are the best of friends. And he is...
I heard you call him Santa Claus.
Yeah, he is truly, truly the most generous and kind man I've ever met my whole life. So my adoption story is really a heroic one and a great one.
You knew the story growing up. It wasn't kept from you, right?
No, never, yeah.
Do you think part of your skepticism towards government, war, bureaucracy came from that story?
Yeah, sure. But I not only did I know emotionally that they're all liars, I just saw it constantly. I mean, I was reading all the time. By the time I was in 11th or 12th grade, I had a pretty good understanding that the teachers were worthless, that the school was a sham,
Sound like a smart ass.
Well, it's as you know, anything that is administered by the government is going to completely suck, right? Why on earth, people think that sending their kids to a public school is a good idea is completely beyond me. Would you go to a public airport for fun? Would you go? Would you use the post office? Would you go there for a good time? Would you? I'm trying to think of it. Every time you go to the DMV where you get your driver's license, every time you have to interface with the government, it's always a nightmare. Always. So why would you send their kids anywhere near them?
I think a lot of it for parents is just free babysitting, right?
Yeah. So they're getting their money's worth.
Yeah.
Or a whole lot less. Actually, they're getting my money's worth.
We're working for Steve now. I want to come back to late 90s. Why did you get fired from Agora?
Oh, that's a great question. So Steve and I had been down there and this group that Agora bought called Wealth Research. That was what we did. And it was mostly business-to-business publications about economic and business development in Latin America and Asia. But there was a finance component to it. And so when that business was struggling and failing, Bill Bonner came down and he fired everybody there. There was probably 70 or 80 people that worked there. Fired everybody. And he came and he asked me and Steve if we wanted to move to Baltimore and try our hand at writing financial newsletters. And Steve was like, well, that's what I came here for in the first place. And I was like, you mean I still have a job? Sure. So we moved to Baltimore in the summer of 98. And I started writing something called the Fleet Street Letter for Bill Bonner directly. It was it's actually the oldest financial newsletter in the English language. It got started in the 1930s in London. And the track record of that letter is really incredible. All the stuff that they predicted about Hitler and the war all came true. And so it was a great opportunity for me, and I was making the most of it. The trouble was, Bill was an absentee landlord. He was living at the time in a rural France on a farm, and he had abdicated responsibility for the financial newsletter business to a person who shall remain nameless for legal reasons. But this person and I had an enormous personality conflict because I didn't believe that he knew anything about finance, and I was fairly certain he didn't have he did not have good intentions for the subscribers. As you remember, back in the 90s, there were a whole lot of people around the newsletter publishing world who thought that the way to run the business was to get paid to recommend stocks. And a lot of those stocks that would get paid to recommend were not very good. And Steve and I had a very different idea. We thought that if we did good work in finance, that there would be so much more value in our newsletters that we could charge a lot more money for them and people would renew them and it would be a great business. And so we had that mindset, and this person sort of had the other mindset, and we just did not get along at all. And so even though my track record at the Fleet Street Letter was great, and even though the business was working, I got fired in January of 1999.
Do you remember, was there a specific conflict that day or that week, or was it just the buildup of the tension between you?
Yeah, it was just the buildup of the tension. He kept telling me what to write, and as you can imagine, that doesn't work very well. So he would tell me what to write, and then I'd go to meetings and tell him what an asshole he was, and that didn't go over very well.
So you're out of a job, and you just moved to Baltimore, and I understand that you went knocking on doors trying to find a finance job in Baltimore, including applying at a all-black investment firm.
Yeah, Chapman. Yeah,
and you didn't meet the qualifications.
Yeah, it was a funny story. It just didn't occur to me that race had anything to do with finance. Money's green. And I literally knocked on every single financial firm in downtown Baltimore. Yeah. And Chapman, the African-American firm, was very friendly and warm and sat me down and talked to me, but then explained that I wasn't going to get a job there. Most other places weren't nearly as warm and friendly. Most people just shooed me off.
I think the story I'm going to ask you about now is one of the best wealth creation stories I've ever heard. $36,000 to $4.75 billion in value and over $500 million in dividends. No outside capital beyond that point. It's really the story of your career, and it's incredible. I want to ask you about it, but tell me about the weekend or the moment that it started and the pitch to Bill.
Well, I didn't know anybody in Baltimore except for Steve Sugarud. And I didn't have that much money. At that point in my career, I had probably saved, I don't know, less than $50,000, certainly. And I didn't want to have to sell my socks and everything else, which I was going to have to do to pay rent. I knew that if you've ever been out of a job, you can always feel the clock ticking. And so I went around town to try to find a finance research job, couldn't find one. So I went home, and ironically, I've loved writing newsletters so much that when I was writing about Latin America and Asia for my job, I would come home at night and I would write my own newsletter about the stocks I was interested in from around the world. And most of those stocks that I was writing to my friends and family about privately were tech stocks. And so I went home from a day of getting nowhere in Baltimore, getting a finance job, and I wrote a letter about how I thought the world was going to change because of the internet. And I told the story of laying the fiber optic cables down along the railroad right-of-ways and under the oceans. And I talked about the different businesses that I knew were going to grow enormously because of this radical change and the nature of communication.
There's a new railroad in America making everyone rich.
And I had read Claude Shannon's famous book from 1948, The Information Theory of Communication. And so I really understood a lot more than most people did about the importance of bandwidth and how fiber optics was going to really change computing, going to change information, going to change pretty much everything. I had been smart enough to buy Amazon stock in 1997. So I had seen that these can be great businesses. And I wrote all that down, basically. And I don't remember exactly how long it took, but it was several days. And I don't know about you, but when I get into a zone, when I'm locked in and I'm writing, I basically only stop to sleep for a couple hours, and then I
lose track of time.
I just can't. It has to come out. And so I did it like that. It was 4 or 5 days straight of writing, not leaving my apartment. And I sent it to Bill Bonner when I was finished, along with a couple of other colleagues. And I said, Bill, this is what I always wanted to write about, and fired me. So I'm not going to write the Fleet Street letter. But maybe you'd want to go into business with me and have a technology-centric newsletter. And at the time, we were going to call it Pirate Investor, because the idea that I had was that companies that are using disruptive new technologies can pirate the market share of older entrenched companies, and investors generally don't see that coming. And so that was really what it was all about. And the Innovator's Dilemma that Clayton Christensen had written was very influential in that idea as well. So anyways, Bill said, sure, it sounds great. And so he gave me a marketing budget, which ended up being $36,000. And I worked on the package with Mark Ford for about 6 months to get it right. And when we started mailing it, because this is before email marketing, we actually had to print it and put postage on it and send it. It ended up being the best performing newsletter package in the history of the industry. We made something like 800% ROI in 30 days on that mailing. And we proceeded to mail the phone book. I mean, we mailed everybody. And so we went from 0 to like 100,000 subscribers in the first year.
Wow. And so you were in the chips from that point on?
Yeah, we never had any more capital come into the company. And the entire time I ran it, we never had a month in the red.
So you were like late 20s?
I was 26 years old when I mailed that package, yeah.
And what did you do with the first money you made?
This is an interesting story. I had asked Bill to pay me $50,000 for the package. And he said he didn't want to give me that money for the package, but he would invest that money in the package. And I said, okay, well, what do I get out of it? And he said, how about a job? And I said, I need a little bit more than a job, because I was just working for you and just fired me. And he says, okay, well, I'll give you an equity stake in the business. And I didn't know anything about equity stakes or anything like that. I never encountered that in my career, but I trusted Bill. So I said, okay, that's fine. And we shook hands on it. And people will find this hard to believe, but we never ever had an operating agreement until we were preparing for the IPO. We just had a handshake and we both lived up to it.
Almost $5 billion business on a handshake.
Mm-hmm.
But what did you do with the money that you made as a 27-year-old?
Well, I didn't really make any money because we were
no dividends from the package?
No, we were putting the money back into the business. And, right as we got up to scale in the mid-2000s, the market broke and there was a big, big tech crash.
Right.
And then the business barely survived 2001. And then in 2002, that's when I brought in Steve Sugarroot as a partner. And we started marketing a safer letter called True Wealth, which did very well. And we brought in Dan Ferris with Extreme Value. And by that time, David Lashmet was finding his feet as a really good medical tech guy. And that product was doing well. So I didn't really make any money in the business until about 2004. And to answer your question, what did I do with the money? I bought a house to live in, and I got married. Yeah.
What did you learn from Bill Bonner?
What I learned from Bill Bonner is really hard to explain, but is by far the most important idea you'll get out of this interview. What I learned from Bill Bonner is that success cannot be managed. You cannot direct your business from the top down. You have to allow the people who are closest to the customer to develop the products, and you have to invest in them heavily. And most of them won't work. And that's a very tough lesson for entrepreneurs like me who think they have all the answers. But I've realized over my career that Bill's right. You cannot direct the business from the top down. The business has to grow organically, and it has to be led by the people who are closest to the customers.
So I have some exposure to newsletters in Vancouver, and they're more like the variety you described from the 90s where, a writer's building up some goodwill in exchange for exploiting it at a later time. And Dan Ferris, in a recent interview with you, said like one of the great all-time value captures was you just saying, let's do this for the subscribers. That's like Amazon's business model. It's really simple. And the things that you talk about are pretty simple, but what made Stansberry so successful?
Steve and I had a genuine passion to help investors. We actually gave our research to the people that we grew up with in town. In fact, I've said this in other interviews, but I write my newsletter to a person. His name is Ted Bywater. He was the founder of the Bywater Company, and he was the most successful guy I knew growing up in my small town. And his beach house was next to my family's beach house. And I grew up with his kids, and I cared deeply about him and his family.
Was he your hero?
No, he wasn't my hero. He's a little bit of an irascible character.
Sounds like you.
Different in ways. But he was a successful guy who knew one business. He knew real estate inside and out. But he wanted to be able to make passive investments in the stock market. And of course, every person he went to, he couldn't trust, and it was a disaster. So he had a broker. The broker would churn his account and not make him any money. He thought he would, be in a mutual fund, high fees and no performance. And, I thought, Ted, you're a smart guy. You understand business very well. You can do this yourself. Here, let me show you. And he loved our newsletters and used them successfully. So that's what I wanted to do for people. And I thought there was a tremendous value proposition in that. When we started selling our Alliance membership, an Alliance is an offer where you get everything we publish plus whatever we grow to in the future. So it's an investment in us. We started selling it at $2,700. And if you look at the number of unbelievably great investments that we have recommended and brought to our clients from 2003 until today, I mean, it's extraordinary. There's got to be at least 50 investments that we pounded the table on that ended up being 500+% returns.
You made some epic calls like, the GE, Fannie Freddie bankruptcies, the fracking boom, just off the top of my head, the oil crash in 2014. I'm sure there are many others.
And by the way, not just me. We have other people who are doing incredible things too. Sugarroot's track record is the best in the company. David Eifrig's is as good as mine. David Lashmet in biotech, 1 out of 3 of his picks over his lifetime have doubled.
Wow.
I mean, it's extraordinary. So we were able to organize a lot of talent. We also found that when we treated the customers really well, we were able to attract really high quality people, because there are a lot of smart people who don't like the Wall Street business model of selling the customer down the river and didn't want to be a part of the goodwill sale business of a regular newsletter. And it just seemed to me that there was a great value proposition. We could, for a couple of $1,000s, we could give you a lifetime of investment research. And it's worked.
So tell me about 2020, 2021. You build the business up to this scale, and the market's excited, and there's a SPAC deal to take your business public. Had you thought about taking the business public before?
It's something that had occurred to me, that our culture and the quality of our people could lead us into something bigger than just newsletters. And I didn't know if that was going to be a hedge fund or an investment bank or a private equity firm or just a much bigger publishing company. But I knew I wanted to do more with my career than just write a newsletter. And by the way, I'm very proud of my newsletter. And, I spent 25 years, 7 days a week, 10 hours a day trying to do the best I could for my newsletter subscribers. And that pressure never goes away. So if I was working, that's what I was focusing on. And that led to a lot of negative externalities. It was bad for my health. It was terrible for my marriage. And my wife and I split up in 2018. And I just knew I couldn't go on at that pace anymore. I don't know if you've ever, or anyone listening has ever had that happen where you just realize, ooh, I'm not going to make it. Like, I'm actually going to die doing this because it's killing me. And so I just knew I only knew one way of writing newsletters, which was full tilt. And so if I couldn't be 100% in, I wanted to be 100% out. And that's when we started thinking seriously about finding a way to sell the company. Steve was also at a point in his career where he was exhausted and wanted a break. And we'd created a lot of value for a lot of subscribers and a lot of value for our partners. And we thought it was a reasonable time to move on. We were approaching 50. Originally we had talked about going public because I thought we could make the company something bigger. But I realized in 2018 that wasn't going to be with me. That I was really good at newsletters, but I was sort of worn out and also kind of too old to personally move the company to the next level. So we brought in some folks that we thought would be able to do that for us. And I have to admit, we chose poorly. So we went forward with the IPO process in 2019 and 2020. And one thing after another went wrong. And you may already know this, but investment bankers are not the most honest people in the world. And so we ended up sort of settling for this SPAC process, which was not our ideal outcome. And it was a disaster, as you know. And so I had left the company in December of 2020, and it was sort of a precondition of this SPAC deal because the banks didn't want to work with me.
Why was that?
Well, it's interesting. That you have to ask them, but they were consumed with the idea that because of my politics, radical libertarian, that somehow in their world equated to something that wasn't tolerable under the DEI world. And I know this exists. I mean, we've had problems with Google publishing editorial work, not advertising, just, people. The government's very powerful. And if you oppose the government in your writing, get ready for trouble. And so the banks just didn't. The banks, as I'm sure you realize, are an outgrowth of the government. They're instruments of government policy. And they wouldn't take my company public, regardless of the quality of the business or the quality of the research or anything else, because I was on the political no-fly list, if you will. And so I had to leave. And I was really ready to leave anyways because I was worn out. And hopefully you'll never go through a divorce, but it's grueling and awful. And so I had young children, and I was going through a terrible divorce, and I was ready to have some time off. So they promised me $100 million, and they promised me a liquid security, and they promised me that they were going to keep the culture of the company and move us into the promised land, do things like have a public listing that would allow us to do bigger acquisitions, perhaps consolidate the industry, yada, yada, yada. And what they did instead was within 12 months of me leaving, they took a business that had made money every year of its existence, and they ran our margins to zero. So, and the year I left, we made around $150 million in cash. And within 12 months of me leaving in January of 22, the profits were zero.
The height of the enthusiasm, the stock was ripping, and there was a time when Porter Stansberry was a billionaire. And I think you said recently it was a week. What was that week like?
Well, I was having a good time. I thought that I was expecting a huge financial payday. They promised me $100 million at the IPO. By the way, I got nothing.
Was that like in a secondary sale or something?
No, they promised me at the
cash bonus or something?
No, they promised me that transaction was going to be me selling Ascendant 15% of my shares for $100 million. And of course, Ascendant got my shares, but I never got paid. So what happened? How does that happen? And We had a situation where a partner promised us $411 million for 20% of our shares as a group. And then the Thursday before the deal was supposed to close, they withdrew all of the money, all of it. And for some reason, our management team still closed the deal. You're not allowed to give away $400 million worth of my stock that I own personally, right, to another person with no cash. And that's what our management team did to me.
It's an incredible high to an incredible low really quickly. I'm wondering, how bad was that time on you? Like, how hard on you was that?
Well, it wasn't as hard as you think because I didn't understand it. So I left the company in December. And as part of that, I had to give up my proxy. I had to give up my board seat. I had to actually leave the premises. Like, I had to be gone. So I retired. I bought a house in Miami Beach. I bought a really nice new fishing boat. And I was having fun with longtime fishing and diving friends of mine. I don't know if you know, but I'm an avid free diver and spear fisherman. And I was single. So I was really having the time of my life. And when the deal happened, what I got told was, oh, there's a hiccup in the deal, and we're going to do a secondary offering in September, and we'll pay you then. So I was, okay, that's fine. I trust these people. Big mistake. So I was enjoying myself. I wasn't aware that anything was amiss. And I really wasn't aware of anything was amiss until finally in late 21, I saw them doing things that didn't make any sense. They hadn't paid me any money yet, but they were using company funds to buy back stock. And I was like, what are you doing? And of course, nobody would give me a straight answer. Nobody would talk to me. And so things fell apart very quickly after that.
Personally, though, like you talked with Ferris about having to sell planes and boats and cars, pay a tax bill.
Yeah. So in January, so this is now 6 months post deal, I realized something's wrong. They're doing all kinds of crazy things with my money and with my company, and they've run the performance of the company into the ground. And I just realized what's happened, and things really quickly at that point just got worse to worse to worse to worse. All kinds of really bad things happened, which I don't really want to get into because they may yet be litigated. But really, really bad behavior occurred. And so I knew that these people weren't my friends anymore and that I was going to have to do something about it. And so what I did was, my first instinct, by the way, wasn't to call the lawyers, because the one thing I know you'll never find in a courtroom is justice. So I sold a bunch of fancy cars. I sold all my boats, and I let my leases on the planes lapse. And I raised something like $15 million in cash. And then I launched a new competing company called Porter & Company. And my theory was that those asshole lawyers are not the people that made Stansberry Research great. I was. And so my non-compete with them had expired at the end of 21. So I was under no obligation not to compete. So I launched a company, and I'm very, very happy to tell you that was a fantastic decision. It took me about 6 months to spool it up from start, from building this barn. At the end of our first year, we had 12,000 paying subscribers. We have a 1-year lifetime value of $3,000 a subscriber. We have a 78% renewal rate and a 48% conversion to lifetime. Because when you treat investors well, they're happy to pay a reasonable price for it.
What changed from 2019 being burnt out to 21, 22, let's do this all over again?
Seeing somebody destroy my legacy. That's very motivating. By the way, they did a whole bunch of terrible things, which eventually I'll write a memoir about. But among the things they did was fire a bunch of my friends. And so I was really pissed off.
Our mutual friend, Sean, said that you were like Michael Jordan. I took that personally. And
they were destroying my customers.
You're back as CEO for 6 weeks now, and I'm excited to see it. That's what prompted me to write the story. Stock is up 100+%, which obviously is a endorsement for you as leadership.
I don't think so. I think it's an indictment of how poorly the company was being managed. Again, within 12 months of me leaving, virtually every senior member of management had found a way to more than double their salary. What? The final third quarter report that the previous management team put out, and you can look this up for facts, showed that the business was declining by more than 20% in the previous 12 months, and that the overhead had increased by 35%. So we're now, almost 2 years into the destruction of the company, and the management team has not yet figured out how to at least cut costs. And I think that the stock has gone up because now people think that it at least won't go to zero, which is where it was heading.
Well, the ownership mentality is back. I think you're one of the, if not the largest personal shareholder. And I know that it's important for you to pay dividends and restore the value that you created in the past. And you said something interesting. I'm excited about your shareholder letters just because when a great writer starts communicating, there's lots to learn from the Bezos letters and the Buffett letters, and I'm excited about the Stansberry letters. You said that you're not going to talk about the future in your investor communications, which is really interesting to me because I've for 15 years been talking to CEOs and all they do is we're going to do this, 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 we're going to do this. And so it's refreshing, but at the same time, my next question is what's your vision for the business? How do you articulate that if you don't want to make promises?
The vision for the business is very, very simple. We want to hire the very best analysts in the world. We want to publish great research, and we want the customers to be clamoring to buy it because it's so good. Just kind of like Steve Jobs, although I know I'm not Steve Jobs. I'm just saying that everything has to do with the product. If you have a great product, it will sell itself. And it's great that we have great marketers. It's great that we have great marketing. It's great that we have great sales letters. All that's great. But the value that we created at Stansberry Research was always in the product. And if the product delivers for the customer will come back. And that's the root of what we do. And the people in the company that I recruited and that I hired and that I trained understand that. And you're going to see a giant increase in focus on product and product quality. And that's the only thing I can tell you for sure about the future of the company.
You're in a niche. I guess there's Bloomberg, S&P Global listed 100 billion plus market cap, Morningstar 10 billion market cap. Are there other public companies that are in your wheelhouse that are like market-wise today?
I'm sure there are. I haven't thought about that question deeply enough. I know there's Value Line, just to name another one, and there's probably others that have high quality information products that are very valuable. But I think in the finance space, we're in a very unique position where we can perform a lot of the tasks that other people are charging a lot more money for than we are. If you look at something like our total portfolio, which has long and short positions and has a great track record, this is Stansberry Research's total portfolio product. You can go to a hedge fund and pay them how much to manage $1 million account for you on the same basis. And then you realize you could buy the total portfolio for $5,000 for a lifetime. And so, again, assuming our product quality is very high, the value that we can provide to the customer is extraordinary relative to our competition. And I think that's a very good reason to have an interest in our business. It's certainly what I like as an owner.
Why is the newsletter space, when done right, why is it such a great business?
It's just enormously scalable. A stock that I'm interested in right now is John Deere. John Deere is trading at 10 times earnings. It has a 30% annual return on equity. It's one of the greatest brands, one of the greatest businesses ever made. Understanding why that's likely to be a very good investment over the next decade is worth a tremendous amount of money to people. And doing all the research to understand all the public filings and all the risks and everything that goes into making a good long-term investment is a lot of work. And if I hired a financial analyst and a lawyer and sent people to talk to the John Deere dealers and all the things that you should do before you make a big investment, that might cost me $250,000. And if I'm going to invest $10 million into it, it's worth it for me to do all that research for myself. But once I've done that research, selling it to the next person is almost costless. And so it's a great business because as we scale, our returns on our investment, it can be enormous. If I were to do that report on John Deere and sell it to, to 10 people, even if they paid me 50 grand each, which is a lot of people do this kind of business. They have high quality research teams and they sell to institutions at a high price. Well, that's great. I just doubled the return on my investment. But if I spend $250,000 on that report and I sell it to 20,000 people and everybody pays me a grand, which is a much more affordable price, I'm going to make a whole lot more money, a whole lot bigger return on my investment.
It seems like software, almost like.
It's exactly like software. And if you look historically at our margins and our revenues per employee and our profits per employee, we align very closely with the very highest end
Intellectual property
on NASDAQ. Yeah.
And also the product is immediately out of date, right? Like you need not immediately, you always have a need for more information, more ideas and the updates. So there's a stickiness.
That was something that I think was one of the key breakthroughs for me, was I realized back in the early 2000s that our customers had a lifetime need of research. Selling them a subscription for 1 year isn't really helpful when you're getting into an investment that you're planning to hold for 4 or 6 years. And so I think I was a pioneer in our industry in creating these longer term offers where, like joining a country club, you pay an initiation fee and then you pay a maintenance fee to stay active, but you get a lifetime worth of research, which actually fits your need. I remember when we launched our Credit Opportunities letter, which was a distressed debt investing research piece, because of the bear market we saw developing in credit in 2015, which did develop, was great. We had at one point where, the average yield over treasuries was 10% for non-investment grade debt, which is a really good opportunity. We did great with the product. The customers loved it. And I went to my marketing managers and I said, guys, we're not going to sell this product on anything except for a lifetime basis. And we're not going to sell it for anything less than $8,500. And they said, Porter, what are you doing? We're going to price everybody out of the market. If you're not going to sell it for around $1,000, our customers aren't going to buy it. And I said, it doesn't make any sense. One corporate bond costs $1,000. If you can't tell me our research is not worth 10 of the bonds, assuming you're going to go buy 100 of them, that doesn't make any sense. And the other thing is, these bonds, we're going to hold them, I bet, on average for at least 3.5 years. So if I sell you an annual subscription, what have I done for you? Nothing. I've got you in a position now where you're not going to know what to do. You're not going to know when to sell. You're not going to have the information that you need. And so we sold that product on a lifetime basis only for $8,500. And I want to say we made $20 million on that product in 6 months. And our subscribers must have made a fortune because the average return on those bonds was over 30%. So again, it's scalable, and the information that we can produce is really valuable, and people are happy to pay a fair price for it. If I'm gonna put $1 million into bonds, I don't mind spending $8,500 on the research, especially if I end up making 30%.
I know my generation's still a little bit young for financial products and services, but we're getting up there, and I do think the skepticism of the wealth management industry is high, and I think alternatives to obviously passive investing, ETFs, are popular. And while I just said isn't your subscriber base dying, I'm also wondering isn't this a huge tailwind, right? This self-directed mistrust of the space for the future.
Tommy, I honestly don't think it matters. I think that kind of tailwind talk is the kind of thing that the previous management team
sales talk
was selling to Wall Street. All that matters is product. If you're reading a newsletter and every year that newsletter gives you 3 or 4 absolutely money good ideas that are solid, right? I'm not talking about you got lucky on a penny stock, or I'm talking about I'm trying to think of a really good example. When I recommended Hershey in 2007, I recommended it in December of 2007, which was about 30 days after the stock market had peaked. The stock market went on to the worst decline we'd seen in our lifetimes, 50% decline, right? I bought Hershey at exactly the wrong time. But I wrote in my letter, this will be the best recommendation I ever give to investors ever in my career. if you ignore everything else, but don't ignore this, you've got to buy this stock, and let me explain why. And I showed how you're going to make 15% a year in the stock over the long run, and how it was absolutely the safest thing you could do with your money at that time. If somebody's giving you that kind of advice, by the way, that's what happened. If someone's giving you that kind of advice, you're going to buy that product and you're never going to leave that product. And if we can just do that, then it won't matter whether there's a tailwind or not a tailwind. It won't matter how many people are older or not older. The value of that compared to what we sell it for, that's an incomparable amount of value. You buy a new iPhone, you're not getting wealthier.
Mm-hmm.
You buy my newsletter, I promise you, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you get wealthier. And my track record proves that I can do it.
In 2015, you acquired Casey Research, which was a publisher that I had some exposure to. And a friend of mine worked there at the time. And I had heard about you before, but he came back he was in the room when you came in and gave a speech to the staff. And he came back and he was like, this is the most incredible thing I've ever heard, describing how your vision for the business. And so I was wondering if you could share what is the secret speech you give to employees to be great letter writers, to be great communicators around their research?
What I have found is that inside these businesses, most people care very deeply about the customer. Most people do. And most people don't want to be associated with a business where the product isn't great. And Casey Research had lots of good people, and it had lots of lousy products. And what I wanted to do was fix the products. And I came in and explained why this is so important and what has to change. And I don't know who you're speaking about, but they must have been very impressed that I cared deeply about the customer and that we were going to find a way to do better by them.
It was more about it was about how to communicate in a way, in a stronger way. It was about how to make your research more valuable, more readable. It was about how to write in a way that's more memorable and more valuable, so people actually read the stuff. So he came back and said you just turned on his head how he thinks. So he's a researcher thinking about stock NAVs and basic stuff, and you really opened his mind to you need to add incredible value, but you need to do it with a story.
Yeah.
And I think that's what just shook him so much. It was like, we've got to make this information more engaging.
Right.
I think you're the best in the world at it, to be honest.
Well, I don't know about that, but I do know that there's a reason why the Bible is the best-selling book of all time, if you will, or the most printed.
Why is that?
And someone's going to say, no, the Quran is. But I just mean in general, right? The Bible was an enormously powerful book. And the answer is because it's all stories. And it's all drama. It's all stories of men and women and husbands and fathers and sons. And, it's all storytelling. It's not like if you picked up the Bible and you wanted to ingest the meaning of it, you could do it in one sentence. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's the essence of the Christian ethos that's in that book. But that's not what they did. They told you all these incredible stories. They explained how the world was created. They explained, all the different things about the history of the Jewish people that were so important that they didn't want to be forgotten. They explained the miracle of the good news of Jesus, and they explained it in stories, not just by telling you, oh yeah, God's son is here and he got crucified. It's all storytelling. I think that people read our newsletters originally because they want to do better with their investments. But I think they only keep reading them if they learn to love your storytelling.
It's like a combination of business history, analysis, and industry insight. Like, think about the way you broke down the insurance business and like the Buffett approach. And it's like, so you're incredibly engaged while you're learning something. You don't even know you're being taught something. And you're also getting actionable ideas. Like, what are the rules that if you have a publisher or an analyst working for you, like, what are the must-dos to make a great research report?
The first thing is very simple. It has to be a compelling opportunity, right? It doesn't do you any good to talk about a stock that's going to go to zero.
Yeah.
Unless you're shorting it. So you got to have a compelling opportunity. But then the thing that I'm really looking for is there's an emotional eureka that happens when you finally realize that now you understand an industry or a business model that you didn't before. And so I'm just looking for that eureka. When I put that report down, I want to be able to go have an intelligent conversation with someone who's spent their entire career in that industry, and I want to be able to understand their language. And I'm just fascinated by businesses. And I'm just fascinated by the fact that you can take a business that's really performing very, very poorly. You can put one extra person into it, and the business can completely change because that one person actually knows what that business is really all about. And if you think about it, most of the time, that's just sales technique. But there's a lot more to it. I mean, if you just think about the number of people who built electronic-related products over the last 50 years, and you think of Steve Jobs. What did Steve Jobs know about electronic products that other people didn't understand?
What stories?
He understood that people have an emotional relationship to their electronic products, that they have an emotional connection to their phones and their computers and things like that. So therefore, they have to be beautiful and they have to be easy to use. And I don't think IBM ever understood that, or Microsoft or anybody else. And so if you were trying to explain Apple to people, that's what you'd have to understand. But that's a unique thing to Steve. That's just an example.
How do you deliver your
But like property and casualty insurance, right? I mean, there's all kinds of ways of looking at that business. But the reality of that business is really simple. It's underwriting profits plus a pile of bonds. And then once you understand it that way, it really changes the decisions that you make around it.
But how do you, if you're a research writer, how do you deliver a eureka moment to the subscriber?
With a story. So with property and casualty insurance, can you imagine a more boring thing? Imagine if I put up a billboard, this week, live,
Property and casualty
Porter
story.
Stansberry explains property and casualty insurance. Don't miss it. Come to the Hippodrome. Only $29. Get your tickets today. I wouldn't sell a single ticket. But if I told you there was a guy named Shelby Davis, and he is the only guy in the history of the financial markets that ever became a billionaire using only his own capital and only investing in common stocks. And he did it by buying 7 companies, just 7. If you knew that story and you knew it was true, wouldn't you immediately want to know, what are those 7 companies and what the hell business was that? And the answer is they were all property and casualty insurance companies. One of them was Geico.
So delivering eureka to me, I think...
Isn't that a eureka? You go,
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, that
Makes it relatable.
Yeah, you mean for 40 years, this guy just made more money year after year after year, and he started with $50,000 and he became a billionaire in his lifetime? Yeah, I want to know how he did that.
Where do you get inspiration for the stories you tell?
I read all the time. And when I come across something, I just want to know it. Like, what happened? How did T. Rowe Price get to be the leading money manager in Baltimore, and I think one of the leading money managers in America? Who was T. Rowe Price? What's that story all about? Munger just passed away as we're filming this. And yeah, I want to know how he met Buffett, and I want to know all the different things and stories of his life. I'm fascinated with people and with businesses. And
What is your information diet?
oh man, I don't know. I just read everything.
So do you have the Bloomberg screens or what?
I have a Bloomberg terminal like everybody else. To tell you the truth, I rarely use it. I use it when I need to know 20 years worth of numbers for something. But you know what my most powerful piece of information is? Source of information is? Where is it?
Right here.
I think the thing that distinguishes my financial writing more so than anything else is that I try not to write about anything where I haven't had a very good conversation with 3 or 4 people about that company or in that industry. I can learn more in 10 minutes on a phone call than I can learn in 100 hours of reading on my own. And so I think that's the real secret.
Is that conversations with entrepreneurs or conversations with people in the businesses?
Both. Yeah.
How do you begin to filter ideas? Obviously there's a big team here that's helping and sending you, feeding ideas and stuff, but where do you start to choose a business to look down this rabbit hole? Or
let me give you an example. This is how it actually happens. I've spent 30 years as a researcher talking to people. And when I get good information about something, I know there are 3 or 4 people who would love to have that information. I call them and I tell them, hey, I just heard from so-and-so. This is what's going on. Check it out. So you're in this information loop all the time. So yesterday I got a call from one of my best contacts in insurance. And he told me a really incredible story, and absolutely incredible story. I don't want to give away too many details, but an insurance company that has a very large captive market where the government has just made an enormous change in its favor, where the resulting income for this company is going to be 4 or 5 times its current market price. It is a great story. It is truly one of these rare things that happens every year or two where there is free money sitting there. And the only reason why people haven't bought the stock yet is because nobody follows the sector. Nobody. Property and casualty insurance is never going to be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And so working in that space for now 11 years, I've been writing about property and casualty. We get great leads. We get people who call us because they're like, man, this is great. I want Porter to know this. And I know that if I give Porter good information, that he's going to call me, on the flip side and return the favor, which of course we do.
So it's network a lot.
It's all this.
Calling people.
Yeah. And as you know, a lot of people who are writers are introverts, and they want to sit behind a computer all day. They want to draw lines on screens and do all that. And I'm not saying that you can't do that, and that works for a lot of people. But for me, it's all about networking.
I'm just curious, like thinking about you. Are you sitting there filtering through charts, or like where is this idea generator coming from?
I'm out hunting deer.
Yeah.
I'm out meeting people. Like I invited you to come to the farm. I'm a people person. I talk to people.
I've heard successful money managers say before that it was some of their wealthy investor clients gave them their best ideas because they were experts and built businesses and had insight into those. So I guess I want to touch for a second on like copywriting a little bit. Like it's one thing to make a good product. If you don't advertise it, but no one's going to see it. Rolex was a great story. The founder believed in advertising so much, and like look what they created with it. So many obscure little financial reporters that no one reads the stuff, and you guys are very good at getting attention. And I just wanted, I feel like I need to touch on how do you come up with these big idea campaigns? Why are you guys better than anybody else? It seems like at telling your own stories and getting attention to your product.
It's twofold. One, we have had some really good big ideas, and I don't know where they come from. They only come to me when I'm not thinking of them. So if I'm flying in a plane somewhere, if I'm taking a shower, my mind has to be engaged in a task other than writing or thinking about finance. And I don't know how to explain it. It just comes to me, and it's as though someone is dictating it to me in my mind.
Where does the Boston blackout come from?
I realized in January I was in trouble with my partners. They weren't going to pay me, and I knew that I would eventually probably have to go back to work. And I hadn't looked at finance at that point for probably 2 years. I had been retired. And so I just started reading everything. So I started reading the Financial Times every day again. I started reading the Wall Street Journal every day. I started reading all these newsletters that I hadn't read in a long time. Caught up on grants, caught up on Bill Bonner. Spent 3 months just reading. And then I don't know. I was just thinking that America is becoming a more and more socialistic place. And the idea of adding batteries and windmills and things like that to the power grid is just socialism in the power grid. And you know what happens with socialism. The quality of the product's going to disintegrate and the price is going to go sky high. So I started thinking about what the likely outcome of that would be. And then one thing led to another, and I realized that how ironic is it that you have the world's, I believe the world's largest single source of energy was the Marcellus Shale. And it's literally 400 miles from Boston? And you've got Boston importing LNG from Russia instead of just building a pipeline to Pennsylvania. And I just thought it was the most idiotic. I do think it's truly the most idiotic economic story in American history. The idea that our political leaders do not understand the incredible economic bounty that we have from the shale fields. To this day, still don't get it. And that, New York has banned fracking, and you can't build a pipeline anywhere in the Northeast. Well, I can tell you where that's going to lead. I can tell you exactly where that's going to lead.
I think the big idea campaigns, like they resonate so much. It's like any business person has the anti-socialist bias, or most of them you would think would. And so when you tell these obvious big ideas and you add value, like there's as much research in the campaigns, in the marketing packages that you learn something from them.
Well, that's one of my hallmarks. I always want to, if you take the time to listen or to read one of my marketing packages, I want you to learn enough in that free content to make it worth your time to sit through.
Yeah.
Because I know that if I do that, you're going to be, next time you see one of my ads, you're going to want to watch it. Right? So we have to have respect for the customer at all times, whether that's our marketing or our editorial.
One thing I learned from you is like at the very pinnacle of research and the very pinnacle of marketing, they should intertwine.
It's the same thing.
Yes. And
so if you read my editorial, it should get you excited about investing. And if you read my copywriting, it should get you excited about an investment idea that you can participate in through a newsletter.
Because what good is research if it's not persuasive? And what good is a advertisement if there isn't substance in it?
Yeah,
so
that's right.
It's something that I just aspire to learn about. And I was asking one of your colleagues if I could get the new employee guidebook on how to write these sort of things, because just endlessly fascinated about it.
I sent you my...
that 2-pager is fantastic.
Yeah, I sent you my guide to becoming a successful professional financial copywriter.
I appreciate that very much. And it's just 2 pages and so simple. Know the subject matter, right?
Yeah, it's amazing to me.
Yeah.
We have a whole bunch of copywriters that won't even read our newsletters. Not us. I mean, we don't. Our copywriters are great. They understand what the job takes. But there are a lot of people out there who think they can just go string a whole bunch of get rich quick promises together and that's going to work. It won't.
Is a copywriter an artist?
I'd like to think my copy is art. Yeah,
I think so. But
I don't know. Someone else has it.
But is a copywriter a temperamental personality?
I'll just tell you what I think my copy is. I don't think I'm a great writer at all. I think I'm a hack. But I think that I have a knack for just finding these incredible ideas. And I don't really know why, except for I read a lot. And I'm passionate and interested in these things. But how incredible is it that just the juxtaposition, you've got Boston with the highest energy prices in the country, and they are actually importing natural gas from Putin. Meanwhile, how far is Pittsburgh from Boston? I don't know. Let's call it 900 miles. And in Pittsburgh, you have these 3 brothers who start an oil and gas company from scratch in 2007. And by 2020, they're the largest producers of natural gas in the entire United States. And the United States, of course, is the largest producer of natural gas in the world. How is that possible? How can one country be so idiotic, aka Boston, and such geniuses in Pittsburgh? How can that exist? It's a fascinating story. And what does the future entail, therefore, for Pittsburgh versus Boston? Let's find out.
So it's like the story needs a hero. It needs some drama, and you need to learn something from it.
And it's got to be important, right? When I started writing my satirical letters from the chairman of General Motors, I was describing how one of the greatest industrial concerns in the world was going to inevitably go bankrupt because of an entire series of bad decisions as they related to employment pay and money borrowing and poor products and nobody would care if I was writing about some mining stock or some .com or what I mean, like it's got
GE.
but it was GM and it mattered. And then of course all the accounting I wrote about at GE, again, an incredibly important concern. And then also I think the story of EQT and the Rice brothers and natural gas and Boston's idiocy, I think those are big important issues that are going to have consequences, real consequences for real people. And so I think that it's not just about finding a stock that will go up. It's about writing about things that are very important in an entertaining way that leave people far more knowledgeable about the world that we live in.
Thank you for that. So I'd be remiss not to ask you about outlook of markets right now. Yes, last week with Dan Ferris, you said there's a price to be paid for the greatest bubble in history.
Mm-hmm.
And what is that price?
So the greatest bubble in history was the bubble that we saw in sovereign bonds that peaked in, I think they peaked in probably mid-21, or maybe it was mid-20. But when you had 10-year government paper selling for less than less than 1%, or yielding less than 1%, when you had negative real interest rates, that's nonsense, right? That doesn't make any sense. So that bubble is unwinding, and there's going to have to be a price to be paid. And apparently that price is going to come out of the pockets of the American consumer and wage earner, because the Federal Reserve has opened a line of credit that's allowing these banks to use these bonds, which are down 50% or so, and get full collateral for them.
Wow.
So they're printing a whole bunch of money to cover the losses in the banks. And that's going to result in a lot higher rates of inflation, which you're seeing, of course. And the consequences of that will probably be pretty bad for smaller capitalization companies that have weak credit. So I think you're going to see a big default cycle in the credit markets next year, as companies have a hard time refinancing and rolling over debt at a much higher rate.
So where do you advocate shelter?
Well, you can see what's happening, right? The markets are all running into the largest cap stocks because they are not going to have any problem with credit or capital. And I don't know when, but I do know that eventually emerging markets and foreign stocks will have their day. They've been really beaten up for about a decade. So at some point, there's going to be that switch. It may have already begun. You've seen Buffett's big investments in Japan and how well they've done. There's some really cheap stuff out there. I mean, take a look at Petrobras today. The yield is incredible. And sooner or later, people are going to notice. It's a very interesting question of whether or not Argentina is going to turn around. I know Eduardo Elstein, the chairman of IRSA and Cresud. IRSA is a big commercial property business in Argentina, and Cresud is a big agricultural property company in Argentina. And those are very well-run businesses that could, those stocks could easily go up 7 or 10-fold in the next 36 months if the new president of Argentina does anything like what he says he's going to do.
So you're still advocating for finding undiscovered quality individual companies?
Yeah, I think this is something that just most people just do not understand. That the very best way to safeguard your wealth is with ownership, either in full or in part, of a very high quality business, right? I mean, the folks who own Hershey are going to be just fine over the next 25 years. I don't care if there's a war or a depression or whatever else happens, they're going to be just fine. And the same for the companies like Cresud that own a huge amount of farmland in Argentina. They're going to be okay too.
Is MarketWise a business like that?
I don't know. I don't want to comment on the future of MarketWise. But it is my largest holding by a very large margin.
Mm-hmm. You were talking about Jim Rogers in the 70s in a recent interview. And so I need to ask, what do you think of commodities?
Did you know that Jim Rogers was my very first subscriber?
Why?
He met me at a dinner in New Orleans in 1998, and I got to sit next to him. And the following year, I met him in New Orleans at dinner in 1996.
Is it the gold show there?
The New Orleans Investment Conference. It used to be called something else, but
Brian London.
Brian London runs it, right? Yeah. So I met him in 96 in New Orleans, and the next time I saw him was in 1998 in New Orleans. I had dinner with him in 96. By the way, I'm absolutely nobody. I'm 23 years old or 22 years old, and 96, so that I would have been 23 years old. And we were talking about things, and I was a big proponent at that time in my career of trailing stop losses, which I still believe are very useful for speculative positions. And he was at the time was heavily into commodities, of course, that has been, will be, and they were going down. And I said to him, Jim, if you don't use a trailing stop loss, how will you know you're wrong? He said, Porter, that's easy. I'm never wrong. So anyways, we had a fun evening. And then 2 years later, I ran into him in 98. And I hadn't seen him or exchanged emails with him or anything since. And of course, he was a very successful hedge fund manager, money manager, and had been retired for many years after running the quantum fund with George Soros, which is one of the most incredible stories in all of finance. They had an incredible 1,300% annual return for 15 years living together, something insane. So I didn't expect for him to remember me, let alone remember my name. But I was on Canal Street at the Sheraton, and there's these big elevator banks, and I'm going down like a 4-story escalator banks. I'm going down this huge escalator bank, and Jim Rogers is coming up, and we're, I don't know, 30, 40 feet apart, and I see him coming up, and I say, "Hey, Jim," and he goes, "Hey, Porter, how you doing?" And I was shocked that he knew my name and remembered me. It was really shows you the power of his mind. And so when I launched Stansberry Research, he saw the advertisement because he was a reader of Bill Bonner's, and he was my first subscriber.
Commodities today, what is your outlook? If you're talking about 70s and commodities in a bullish sense, comparing it to inflation today, does that mean you have the similar view of commodities in the 2020s?
I would just tell you that commodities markets are very, very unique, and I don't think you can really lump them efficiently together. I'm very concerned about the way that our policies around energy are going to cause a lot of commodities to go up in price. People don't really realize the role that natural gas plays in fertilizer, for example. And so I think there's a very high likelihood that commodity prices continue to increase at a rapid pace for the next, 5 or 7 years. But all of this, in my mind, is just a function. It's not really a function of the commodities. It's a function of the central bank and of the policies of the government. And if they continue to make our power grid more socialistic, then commodity prices are going to go way up. No one is ever going to run out of resources. No one. Because the ultimate resource is right here. It's the human mind. And if you give people freedom and property rights and free markets, you will never run out of resources. Famines are not caused because of agricultural problems. Never.
What causes them?
You know exactly what causes them. Politics causes them.
And precious metals as well. Of
course, yeah. And anytime you print a bunch of money, price of gold's going to go up.
Last year in an interview, you said you were saving in Bitcoin every month. You still doing that?
No, I actually cashed out of Bitcoin. I did that as a part of a recent financial
reorganization.
And so I've had to pay a lot of taxes as a result of the Ascendant transaction. And that's resulted in me having to liquidate my holdings of Bitcoin. But I would definitely be a buyer of Bitcoin. And I have been for many years. But interesting though, I didn't sell any gold. I've never sold an ounce of gold. It's a very good feeling to know that I have enough gold to supply me and my loved ones with everything that we'll ever need for, a very long period of time. And that having that put away in a place where I think it's unlikely the government can take it from me is a very, very good feeling.
Mm-hmm. Are there other trends that you think are worth betting on?
Oh, of course. Man, there's no question that computing and the digitization of everything is going to continue.
What is the latest promotion that our viewers should check out of yours? Is it the 2 men?
I just wrote a VSL, a video sales letter about AI, and I think that the way to play AI is the way that I ended up playing the internet, which is I didn't really invest much in the chips of the internet, although I did recommend Qualcomm and Broadcom and some of these things. But I really focused on recommending the businesses that were going to benefit from the new technology. Ironically, I recommended this old lady's clothing catalog company, Blair. It was a little business in Pennsylvania, and it was trading at like half book value, and it was so cheap. And I realized that over time, over the next 5 years, they're gonna be able to stop printing this catalog, and they'll just have a website, and they have a great client base, and the internet's going to gut their costs, and it's going to allow them to serve their customers better. And the stock doubled or tripled. It was I think our very first recommendation in Extreme Value. And so the same thing with AI. I'm not saying you can't make money owning NVIDIA. I'm saying it's going to be really volatile. And it may be a much better investment for you to own John Deere because they're going to be able to automate all their tractors, and that's going to make them more valuable and way more productive. And so I have a video sales letter out about
Where do I watch that?
Geez, it's all over the internet. Just Google Porter Stansberry and AI.
Okay.
The other thing that we are putting out soon is about the big corporate bond market collapse that we see developing for next year. And then we have a website about that. It's called thereset2024.com. And what I've done in this case is I've gone out. Remember I said my phone's my most powerful tool? I've gone out and I've hired this incredible analyst. His name is Marty Fridson. And he spent 40 years running pretty much every investment bank's high-yield bond research department. So he ran high-yield bond research for Morgan Stanley, ran high-yield bond research for Merrill Lynch, and has then another decade working for various hedge funds. So 40 years of experience specializing in distressed corporate debt. And Marty is now working at Porter & Company. And we both see that next year is going to be this huge default cycle. And there isn't anybody better to guide you in figuring out how to make these kind of investments, which can be extraordinary investments. I mean, by this time next year, we'll be able to buy corporate debt in America. It's a full legal contract. They have to pay you, where the yield to maturity will be in excess of 25%. That's an incredible opportunity.
I hear that, that bond players describe like equity guys as, that's child's play. But how does an average person learn about the credit market or how to start when the information is kind of daunting? Like, where are the stories?
You go to thereset2024.com and you subscribe to Porter & Company's distressed bond letter written by Marty Fridson. And the very first thing you'll get is this incredible primer to buying corporate debt. And it's a little bit different than buying stocks, but it's certainly not impossible. And I firmly believe that if you take the time to learn how to be a corporate bond investor, you may never buy stocks again. That's one likely outcome. The other, even more likely outcome is it'll make you vastly more selective as a stock buyer, which will greatly increase your average returns.
Good insight.
Yeah. If you're making 12% in a bond, then you've got a pretty big hurdle rate to sell that bond to go buy a stock. So it's got to be a much better than average opportunity.
I think we've all been spoiled by booming equity markets, but it's also that for Canadians, it's less tax for a capital gain than an income.
Mm-hmm.
So I can do a 9% capital gain and I'm outperforming a 12% yield on a net basis.
Mm-hmm.
This is what's the worst thing to me about inflation is that my assets are going up, but I'm actually poorer because the appreciation is taxed, right?
There's all kinds of bad things about inflation.
And tax. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I understand that tax has to be paid, that there are things that the government has to have money for that benefit society. I get that. But the way that the capital is taxed is the absolute most expensive way to raise tax for your economy. It's insane to tax capital. Absolutely insane. It's absolutely bonkers.
I don't think they did it in the past. It's a new phenomenon, right?
It's just idiotic. You want to anything you tax, you're going to destroy. So you tell me you want to tax capital formation and you're going to tax investment. You got a whole bunch of immigrants coming to your country. You need housing in the worst possible way. Let's tax capital. Good idea.
For where do you fund? Where
are they going to go get jobs? You got to have somebody create the businesses. Is the government going to do that too? Latest idiocy is in Chicago. It's unsafe for people to run convenience stores, so the government's opening them. How do you think that's going to go?
What is the alternative for funding these social programs if it's not tax?
Well, I agree. Well, first of all, I don't think social programs are a good idea, but I'm not going to get bogged down in that. Yeah. I'm saying you can't tax capital. You just can't. You can tax, if you're going to tax something, you have to tax something, then tax sales, right? Mm-hmm. Tax people who are spending money. Okay, that makes more sense to you. It's not going to hurt your economy the same way that taxing capital is. You have to have a supply of something before it can be distributed
Right.
or redistributed. You can't tax capital; it will destroy your economy.
I wish that was the case. It's just it's absolutely not going to happen, right? There's no way our taxes are going to get clawed back. It's hard to fathom. I particularly remember I'm in Trudeau land right now, and the fear every year with the new budget is, oh, actually the capital gains tax is going up, and it's inching up, and the deductions are getting pinched, and you're seeing it all the time.
You have an enormous advantage that I do not have, which is that you can choose not to pay taxes.
Yes, you cannot. You are always.
I am not.
Uncle Sam.
I'm the land of the free. I'm the land of the free, and I'm not allowed to leave, and I'm not allowed to not pay taxes.
Mm-hmm. That's the one forever Uncle Sam.
People don't understand when I say I'm not allowed to leave. Do you know who pioneered the exit tax? Russia. That's how they could keep a lot of people in their country, make it too expensive to leave. Now America has that.
And as you were talking about recently, that's Snowden is fleeing the U.S. to Russia. It's
not sure that was a good choice. But I like Jim Rogers' move. He fled U.S. to
Singapore, and Robert Friedland's there, and a lot of people. I feel like my home is where my family is, and my friends, and my golf course, and stuff like that. So I'm, as much as I'd like thinking about moving to greener pastures, it's just home is home. You've made Baltimore home. Is it under or overappreciated?
Is Baltimore underappreciated?
Yeah.
Oh man, Baltimore is a disaster. Just to be clear, I do not live in Baltimore.
You're close.
No, not. I live in Baltimore County, which is a very nice place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Baltimore is an absolute hellhole, and I have no idea why they tolerate it. It truly baffles me. But Baltimore has one of the greatest natural harbors in the world. It sits on all these major railroad lines. It has access to I-95. It's 20 miles to D.C. and 100 miles to Philadelphia. It's in the corridor of the greatest economy in the world, and it is an absolute shithole. There's something odd going on in American cities where you have people who are voting for policies that are going to actually destroy them and their families. You have that going on in Boston with the socialization of the energy grid. You have it going on with Baltimore and the decision to decriminalize things that are ruining the city. I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense.
You put out a tweet recently about you've been, I think it was something like, you've been living the life of leisure, and you've been working hard, and you're just happier when you're serving customers and working hard.
Of course, everybody is.
You stand by that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So in this amazing setting where you get to have your favorite handpicked team so close to home and live in this beautiful place, like, are you in a better place now as the CEO of MarketWise again?
Yeah, but I work in a barn.
It's pretty nice.
You're making it sound like it's all fancy.
It's beautiful here.
It's a barn. And I asked my employees, do you want me to get us a building downtown, or do you want to work in the barn? They all voted unanimously. They wanted to stay in the barn. But I know I just don't want people to think there's some kind of newsletter utopia out here. It's a cold winter day, and we're all working together in a barn.
All right. It seems like you have a cool culture and an awesome, inspiring workplace.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We all love the customers here, and we love doing great work. And we love it when we write something that's beautiful and entertaining and informative that makes people money. I can't imagine a better job.
Well, I think we've covered so much ground, so there's no need for me to continue. But thank you so much for the time, Porter.
You're very welcome.
And great to be here in Meadowdale and to meet you a little bit better.
Yeah.
And I hope to do it again.
Okay, man. Good to see you.
Porter.
Thanks for coming.